Hello. Alright, so this is a video tutorial to take you through your week 12 makeup class for the Easter break. For AUD114, you have a couple of things that you need to do this week essentially to get your assessments up to speed for week 13. Main thing is getting your sample library cut together correctly, exported correctly, because a lot of points can be lost just for incorrect submissions. So what I want to talk through is just the correct submission process, how to export the files correctly, and just talk it through in Pro Tools. So what you should be able to see on the screen is the overview of the assessment criteria. As we've already talked about, you guys have been going through the process of giving me your list of proposed elements that you're going to put into it. 8 separate sound sources, as we've talked about, are 8 different objects or instruments, but we still want multiple variants for each one of them. We don't want just 8 sounds submitted. So I'll talk through the process of how you can edit that together a little bit easier. Each sound source should be recorded with at least 2 different microphones. So I do actually want a close and a distant version for every sound. If you want to combine them together, if you feel like you've got a really cool effect, if you blend them together for some sound design purposes, that's fine, but I do still want a separate one submitted as well. Appropriate recording levels throughout kind of goes without saying. It should be recorded without clipping or without being too low in level. Using the DAW to edit each sample to remove the noise and ensure appropriate level and applied topping and tailing. That's kind of what I'm going to talk through today to make sure you know exactly how to do that and it's as clean as it can be. Your choice of signal processing and effects, I'm leaving up to you. You can do that how you see fit, as we've already talked about. And each sample needs to be exported as a stereo interleaved 24-bit 44.1 WAV file, appropriately named with your documentation to go along with it. So in terms of your actual assessment, 20% is dedicated to appropriate level. So if your levels are all over the place, I'm not actually going to be able to give you a high percentage for that straight away. Bounced clear of noise and correct formatting is all a massive part. So if you kind of get the formatting right, the levels right, and you've submitted me clear files that are labeled correctly, you're almost guaranteed to pass. Obviously the quality is what's going to take it up to a higher grade, but we're going to talk through that process just so that you know exactly what to do. So if we have a look at Pro Tools here, we have a just basic Pro Tools session already set up. I obviously haven't gone out and created a sample library like you guys have, but what I'm going to do is just pull in a few sounds just to talk through the process. Also, when I use shortcuts, you'll be able to see down in the right-hand bottom corner whatever shortcuts I'm using. So if there's anything that I do really quickly and you want to double check what that is, just have a look down in the corner. So first things first, let's import some audio. So if we go up here, we've got just a random session that I've worked on, and we can pull a few of these tracks in. So let's make the assumption that we want to do a drum sample library. You'll see in here, these have got a little bit of labeling on here: kick, snare, floor tom, overheads. Let's just, as an example, take a kick, take a snare, take a floor tom, and take the center overhead, just so we've got a few different things. So what we're going to do is copy them into our session. You could add them in if you've already got a good file folder set up, but I'm pulling these from a different folder on my desktop, so I want to put them all together in the same Pro Tools session. Hit done. Where do I want to put them? In the audio files folder, that would make sense. Bring everything in and put them all on their own new track. Yeah, that's cool. I just have already gone through this process, so it just wants to relabel them. So just to have a quick look at what these sound like, we'll just do a quick playback. We might just need to, just so that everything can be heard, let me just change this. this should make sure that everything's going to be heard on the screen capture. So let's just have a quick look. Okay, so we've got basic drums, basic snare, basic floor tom. You can see the floor tom coming down in here. If we just have a look at each one individually. Standard kick with a bit of spill. Standard snare. Let's have a look at the floor tom. Very jungle. We've got some overheads and overall basic kind of drum effects. So what we're going to do is just cut these up as though we're going to create some samples out of them. So first things first, what I'm going to do is zoom right into my session, just using my hotkeys. So if we have a quick look, we can see we've got these clear defined kick hits here and the little quiet snares in between. So I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger so we can see them. And I'm going to make sure that my tab to transient mode is on up here so that I can quickly tab to my transient. And also I've got keyboard focus on up here, which makes it really easy for me to actually break these apart and make them new files. So I just want a couple of variants. I don't want just this one kick hit. I want a couple so that it sounds real when I start to program these into a track. So if I have my cursor anywhere before my transient and I hit tab, that will go directly to the first hit, and then I'm going to press B to break. And I'm going to do the same thing, hit tab, break. That's a snare hit, but we'll delete it. Break it, break, 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 and I'll do one more. Break. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing right here on my snare while I'm all zoomed in like this. You see, it looks like it's over it a little bit, but if we actually zoom in, well, it is a little bit. We could pull that cursor back just a touch. It's always good to double check it because you don't want to cut the first part off the WAV file, otherwise it'll sound real choppy and gross. So drop our cursor here. You can do this visually and manually if you want to just scroll and drop a cursor in and break it. But it just means that you're being a little bit more accurate if you're using the tab to transient function. We've got a couple of snares there. That's fine. With my overheads, I've got kind of a distant version of the snare, so we might use that as an example to show you how to compile and put together the distant examples. There's another one here. Just break them apart. And I'm just going to scroll all the way down and get down to my floor toms. Here we go. That looks like them. So let's have a look. Yeah, these guys. Fast playing, but that's fine. So we'll do the same thing. Tab, break, tab, break, tab, break, tab, break. Go through that process. So now I've got a couple of different files cut. Now I can delete all the extra crap around them. So get this guy, delete it. This is a snare hit in here. So let's just have a look at this kick to start. So we've got some short, tight little hits in there. A couple of snare hits I can get rid of. Cool. All right. So let's say that we delete the rest of that track and we're happy with those as our snares. As our kicks. And these guys will be our snare samples. Cool. So we got a little bit of variant. We'll do exactly the same thing with our floor tom. Delete either side. Come down. Check that these are all right. So there's two hits in there. I can tab to the next transient, even though I can't really see it very clearly. Pro Tools knows better than I do. I can break it there. Do exactly the same thing. Let's pull these apart and just see whether we can hear the difference. Yeah, Yeah, it's not too bad. It's a little bit choppy, but we'll fix that. So the thing to pay attention to now is it doesn't matter that I'm pulling these out of time with the track because we're not dealing with the track. We're turning these into samples. They don't need to be in time with each other. That's not a concern. So I can grab all of these, holding down Shift, and I'm going to drag them all the way to the start of my session. I'm going to do exactly the same thing with all of these little guys. Pull them all down to the start of the session. And I'm going to do the same with these overheads as well, but I've only made a couple of cuts there, so it's not going to be as big a deal. Okay, so let's have a quick little look here. We've got some kick hits. If we pull them apart, let's just check what we're dealing with. Cool. Couple of them. Snares. Couple of different ones. 4 toms. They're a bit glitchy, but that's okay. And then we've got these guys, which are big files. We'll have to tighten these up a bit. So we've got lots of stuff going on in there. We don't just have one nice snare hit in there. So if you were recording these samples individually, hopefully you would have actually just only hit the snare, and then you'd have a nice overhead where it is purely just the snare and not floor toms and all kinds of other things coming through. We can play pretend with that for today anyway. Okay, so the main things that we want to talk about in here, if I pull up those assessment criteria again, cool. Let's say that you go through the process, you process these exactly how you want, and then you're happy. Great. What I want to talk about is removing extra noise, ensuring appropriate level, applying topping and tailing, and exporting them all correctly, because this thing trips people up all the time. It's a stereo interleaved 24-bit 44.1. These files are all mono. So many students export them as mono files, and I immediately have to mark you down. So let's talk about how to do that correctly. So first things first, we want to trim and top and tail each of these files. Now, as we're already aware, we want to make sure that we're correctly fading our files, because every one of these, we've just put a hard cut on an audio file. So if we zoom all the way in here, chances are we might have got lucky, but there we go. We have chopped a file halfway through a waveform. And it's not even until all the way back there that it actually crosses over the threshold so that we wouldn't get a clip. What we want to do is make sure that we have fades on. Now, we can do that manually and zoom in like that, and that will take us a year. Or we can select, highlight everything, and because we have keyboard focus on, we can just hit F, and it will put a fade on both the front and the rear of every one of those clips. That's awesome for the front. You'll notice that each file should start smoothly now. But they're a bit choppy at the end. We kind of get a little bit of cymbal ring. We get some other stuff coming out, which doesn't really sound very nice. This is where you can apply tailored fades to the end of the file so that we have something that's a little bit smoother. Now, if I just pull this out and I hit F, it will by default do a standard fade. That won't be too bad. That sounds pretty nice, but it might not give us exactly the kind of curve that we're looking for. If I want that to change in one way, what I can do is I can delete that fade, and if I highlight that section instead but hit Command F, I will end up with my little fade window, which gives me the choice to actually control it. So I can change the curve of the fade, which means that I can kind of hold the sound and then turn it off really quickly at the end, or I can roll it down really quickly and then fade out a little bit slower. All of these will actually change the way that that effect sounds. So if I change that, let's have a quick listen. It's a little bit tighter. I kind of like that. So what I might do is across these, if I highlight the rest and hit Command F, I can actually, for the very front, I can give them all the same type of effect, the same little standard effect that we already had, change its length to be, I don't know, 2 milliseconds up to, not 24, change it up to 4 milliseconds, somewhere around there. I like it to really quickly fade in. But then at the end, down here, this is where we can actually change so that end section is a little bit different. For this center part, be interesting. Seeing whether it's going to try and group fade them together. We'll find out. Nah, cool. They're too far apart. So that's done them for 10 milliseconds, those fades at the end. But it's the correct type of fade. So what I can do is I can pull it up like that if I want to pull it a little bit shorter. Or with my smart tool on here, I can actually adjust. So if I've got my smart tool up on there, I can pull that length back a little bit. So if I want to say that I want this kind of length applied to everything, I can double check that up here. If we look at the length, we're dealing with, we've got, this is our minutes and seconds. So we've got 0.7 of a second, 0.8 of a second, 0.9 of a second, 0.95. So this length here is about 100 milliseconds. So what I could do just to trial that is if I hit Command F on this guy and I change that to be 100 milliseconds at the end, there we go. We end up with something that's a little bit smoother. So I could then find a setting that I like, apply that to everything, and let's have a quick listen. A little bit choppy, but depending on the genre that you're working on, maybe that's okay. If I wanted to smooth these out, because I've got settings universally now that I like, maybe I could change that to a more subtle curve. And if I feel like I'm getting too much ring at the end of some of these, that cymbal sound coming through, because this is a live recording, yeah, just tightening that file down a little bit will help me to actually clean that up. So I can go through that process on here. I can even grab the fade and move it forward. Lots of different elements that I can do in there to tighten it up. But either way, I don't want to spend a massive amount of time on it. I want you guys to actually use your ears and do it properly. But if we have a quick look on here, I can apply some immediate fades onto the back of these snares. Let's have a listen to these. Cool. Also a bit ringy and a little bit weird. I can grab that fade and control it as well. If we pull it up and have a little listen, let's see what that does. Cool. I like this first one. This one sounds really nice. This one, I'm getting that little hit right at the very end, which kind of takes the magic away a little bit. So let's pull that down. Still a little bit in there. Cool. That's a little bit shorter and nicer. And we're pretty good for those ones too. Let's quickly do the floor toms. Same idea at the ends. I'm going to give him a fighting chance with Command F. Let's take that up to 150 and see what this does. Cool, not too bad. Some of those hits are a little bit quieter. We're going to fix that and even everything out in just a minute. And we've got these overheads. We want these to just be for the snares, so we'll fix them up. Ooh, way too much. So let's tighten that down. There we go. That's kind of our distant snare sound. Same on here. Tighten it down a little bit so that we don't have all that excess in the back. Like that. Again, that's the same hit as this one, and we're ending up with a little bit of change on that file where we get a second hit coming through. It almost sounds like it's gated now with the steepness of that fade. It's like it's got a little suck out sound. That one's a little bit trickier. We'd have to play around with that one for a bit longer. Let's have a look at this guy. Cool, so we've got 2 hits on that one. That's quite a nice one, that end one. So maybe we say that for today we're just going to use this. And I can roll that fade out and make it sound a lot smoother and nicer on there too. Got a little kick drum hit at the end. Little pop. If we want that fade to change, we can just adjust it. Yeah, close enough. Okay, cool. So now we got a whole heap of samples. We need to get these in order first of all, because at the moment, this matches this one matches this one, and this one matches this one. This stuff's going to get really, really confusing if we don't actually name things correctly first up. So what I'm going to do is double click on this file, and you'll notice that it still has the same name coding as what we were dealing with before. Let's change that and actually rename these clips, because that's going to help us so much as we go through the entire process. So first things first, this is our kick. We can just call this kick number 1, all right? If I copy that and double click on this next one, I can then change that to 2, 3. Now this seems like it might be a laborious process, but it's definitely better to do it than not actually name anything, because you're going to get to the end and trying to be exporting files, and then everything's going to have the same name, and you're going to get real confused real quick. So we'll do the same thing here. Snare 1, highlight and copy that. Also can be nice if you just miss out the number on the end, then you don't have to backspace anything. We'll save that one, paste, 2, double click, paste, 3, and 4. Same one here. So we can do the same, 01, copy. So essentially we're looking for naming conventions that are going to be useful if we're working with this as a sample library, and I'm looking for variants of different hits. I want to be able to go, okay, how many snare variants do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. And move on through the process that way. If I don't actually have these really obviously labeled, if you were going to sell this kit, no one's going to want it because it's going to be way too convoluted and way too confusing with the current naming conventions that are on here. So this one is our overhead. Well, it's actually we're going to use it as our snare distant. So we're going to have snare distant 1. This snare distant, I didn't copy that one. Let's go back. Copy that. Now remember, this snare hit goes with this one. This one goes with this one. So that makes sense to call it snare hit 2. This guy doesn't have a match, but this one does. So maybe skipping a number and calling this one number 4 will make sense, because it will match up with them, right? That type of logic, making sure that everything's named really clearly, is super important. Okay, so let's have a quick look at our submission requirements again. So we have used the DAW to remove extra noise. We've ensured appropriate, well, we've done topping and tailing, but we haven't ensured appropriate level. Let's have a quick look at the leveling process for this. If I want to analyze this waveform first and foremost, I'm going to go into Audio Suite, I'm going to go into Other, I'm going to pull up my gain, and with this little plugin, which has just dropped onto my other screen, what we can do is we can analyze the volume of this waveform. So if we hit Analyze, that's going to tell us that at the moment it's sitting at minus 8.6 dB. Its peak is sitting at that level. If I select another waveform and analyze it, at the moment, my kicks must be pretty tight. I know my floor toms don't fall under that category. Let's have a little look. There we go. Okay, so that floor tom is at minus 16. This floor tom... Cool. It's analyzing the entire selection, so it's analyzing my entire waveform, which is why it's giving me weird results like this. So for me to fix that up and change it, this is the gain plugin. Let's have a look at it with the normalize plugin, because that's what I'm actually going to get you to use anyway. If we go into other and normalize in here, fantastic. We have the option to actually render clip by clip. So at the moment, if I leave the settings as is, I can select this clip, hit render, and what it will do is it will render it so that its peak goes all the way up to 0. So if we have a look at our mix window and I solo my kick and I play it back, at the moment it's coming to -7.7 for that one particular hit. If I select that hit and I hit render, whoa, it jumps all the way up like that. And if we play it back, there we go. It snaps all the way up to 0. So we've now rendered that file and massively increased its volume. We don't necessarily want it all the way up to 0, but for a sample library, we're looking for high volume sounds and we're looking for consistency in sound. So I would normally probably look at having anywhere between -3 to -6 kind of dB as a good kind of range. So if we say we're going to put all of these to -3 dB, what I'm going to do is now hit render, and you'll see that that'll change this file. And also, because we're rendering the file, it's also going to change and bring back in that little clip that we'd faded out. All right, can you see that? The fade has not been applied. It's working on the underlying audio file. So to fix that, we can do a couple of different things. Once we're happy with all of our fades here, we can render this and consolidate it to be its own new audio file. You can do that by going the long way up to edit and consolidate clip, or you can use the shortcut, which is Option-Shift-3. If you use Command-Shift-3, you will take a screenshot of your screen. You'll notice that very obviously because they'll all end up on your desktop and you'll hear the noise. So it's Option-Shift-3. So if we have that file selected and we go Option-Shift-3, and now if we hit render, you'll notice we don't get that kick up at the end of it. So what we can do here is just very quickly using our grabber, making sure we're always using our hand on the bottom half of the waveform, just pump through these and render them as new files. Make sure we select the whole thing and don't miss out the fades because that's the important part. I'm just selecting in that gap between the two fades as well to make sure that I'm not just selecting the fade, I'm selecting the whole audio file. And it's coming up with a hash on there, but that's Option-Shift-3 that I'm selecting. Render these all down. And just to teach you exactly what will go wrong if we do it this way, all of that lovely naming that we did, because we haven't renamed the tracks, as soon as you render an audio file, it will re-render it over the title of the track. So let me teach you a little trick. If you type up in here and we type kick as our first file, and we call this one snare, and we call this one floor tom, and we call this one our snare distant. If we had have named them first, let's have a look at what happens if I consolidate that file now. It will be called kick 01, kick 02, kick 03, and it will do that process for you, which is awesome. So generally speaking, naming your tracks, how you want the files to be named is a really important process to go through as well. So now that we've got these sorted, what we're going to do is the next process, which is the normalizing. So you can see here, even if we look at our floor tom, you can see a massive difference in file sizes between these loud files and these quiet files down the end. So what we want to do is normalize these so they're all one level. Now we've already done that with this file here. We've rendered it to be its own value, and now it has a little normalized title on there. If we do this individually, track by track, that will work. If this is on entire selection, you'll notice that you'll go to some of these files and hit render, and the file size won't change. If I come to this one and I hit render, it will change, but this still has a big difference between it. Because it's on entire selection, it's analyzing its volume levels based on the levels of the entire session and the entire track that it's on. So what I want to do is actually change that to be clip by clip, so that it's analyzing this level and distance for every individual track. So now that we've got that, I can just hit render, or select it on, make sure I reselect the track. Select that guy, clip by clip, and double checking on here. Might have just been because we've already played around with that file. Oh, that guy's given us a little bit of difficulty. We'll come back to that one. So what we want to do is make sure that all of these files are rendered to the same volume level. And once we've got them rendered to the same volume level, we have a lot more ease with our library before we export it. That guy is tripping out. Let's fix that another way. I'll show you in a second. I think it's because we'd played around with it, and now the file name is a little bit different to what it intended. So what I'll do is grab this one, and now instead of normalize, I can open another plugin just via this plugin. I'll open the gain plugin. I'm going to analyze it. It's telling me that its peak is going all the way up to 0. I don't believe you. Maybe it's just a view thing. If we zoom everything down, zoom everything all the way up. How bizarre. Analyze it. Analyze this guy. I don't know about that. Let's have a look. Another way that we can check it. I'm going to pull up both my screens at the same time so I can see exactly what's happening here. Something funky going on. Let's pull back up. All these others have been analyzed really nicely and evenly, and we can see that volume change on there. If we go up to bring back our normalize plugin, select our value of -3, come back here, any of our files. It's because it's flicked back to entire selection. We want it on clip by clip. That's why it's tripping out. Okay, so all these guys are fine. All these guys are fine. This guy has been just analyzed in a weird way. That's all right. Cool. Okay, so with these files that we're dealing with now, let's have a quick little look. Okay, so just to double check. All right, so we've got a couple in here. I'm not super concerned if they're not all perfectly exactly the same volume level, but I am looking for consistency of only maybe like a dB or 2 difference between them. A little bit of variance is okay, but I don't want to see super, super quiet sounds and super, super loud sounds, because otherwise we're just not going to end up with something that's usable. So now that we've got these files, there's a couple of different ways that we can go about this. We need to export and bounce each of these files and name them correctly as well. The bouncing process can also help us to name these files, but first of all, let's just check up here. Use the draw to edit each sample, removing the noise, ensuring appropriate level. Let's say that you've processed them, EQ'd them, compressed them a little bit. I'd limit yourself to the amount of reverb that you're going to use unless you're specifically doing sound design. If it's an instrumental recording, stand away from using, and if it's Foley-based stuff, don't really use reverb at all, because you want to be able to add that processing yourself when you download it. Cool, so it needs to be 24-bit, 44.1, appropriately named and organized in a folder. So let's do that bit. First of all, if I select this file, this is my kick. Awesome. If I want to bounce a file, right, I can go use my shortcut, Option Command B, and that will bring up my bounce option here. Now, at the moment, all of these files are going out via the channels 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, just so that I can do this recording. For us in here, what I want to do is actually put it into the folder that I've created, into a bounced files folder. I want to do it offline because I don't want to listen to every sample. And it needs to be, as the session requirements asked for, 44.1, 24-bit. So all of those settings are there, ready to go. All of these are going out of 1 and 2. Awesome, that's great. First of all, if I name this one Kick 1, and I go to put this in my bounced file, I can potentially, if I'm going to have a kick distant as well, probably kick close is going to be good too. So if I now hit bounce, that will take a little quick second. Ooh, we may have a bit of a glitch with our audio, but that's okay. In here, if I now go Command Shift B, you'll notice that it automatically names it with a 2 because it knows what we're doing. So we'll go through this process really quickly, but I'm selecting each one, and most importantly, I've soloed this kick channel. That's the super important part. If I haven't soloed that, then I'm going to hear all of these other things coming through in the background. So now I hit bounce. Now I just hit bounce, and I'm going to do exactly that same thing really quickly for the rest of these. And, ooh, real glitchy. We'll fix that up in a second. I'm just going to do the snare. Same thing. And rename. Do the same thing here. Remember, we soloed it over here. It's now renamed as 2. Cool. Okay. So we go through the whole process. We do that the same for everything. I'm just going to do these distant ones because I want to show you. We just had these auto name from 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember down here we have 1, 2, and 4 because we're missing out that gap. So we need to be really conscious of that naming. So if on here I change this to be snare distant 1, and I hit bounce, can do the same for number 2, and change that one to 4. Awesome. Okay, so let's have a look at what that looks like. This is our Pro Tools session that we've been running. We've got the audio files that we've imported. So we've got all these cuts, all of our different ones from the original files to the normalized ones, everything else, but it's starting to look a little bit organized. All of these files that I've been bouncing should have been going into my bounced file folder, which they have, which is great. The only ones that are a little bit funny is because I was naming them O1 and we didn't end up actually having an O1. We can correct that on here. So now I have a distinct number of differences for my kick close, for my snare close, for my snare distant, and I want to double check that these all work, right? Best way that you can double check that something works is A, play it back, B, import it into a Pro Tools session so you can see the waveforms and you can actually check it out in that way. For us, we could do it in a couple of different ways. I'm going to do it the real lazy way because I've already got Pro Tools open. So if I just grab these files and pull them into here, there you go. You can see them all. And look at that. They are all now stereo files because we exported from the main output that we were listening from. So rather than doing a shortcut like Option Shift K where we can export a direct file, that will only give you a mono file. The assessment asks for stereo. Bouncing them will guarantee that you're going to get stereo so long as you've selected a stereo output. So we now have a whole heap of files. All of these are named appropriately. I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing that I would do is if this was you getting ready for submission, I would, wherever you're working on your files, on your desktop or wherever else, create a new folder. Make sure that you name it appropriately. Helps us lecturers out if you name it with your, or it helps me out anyway, if you name it with your surname first, because then everything falls into nice alphabetical order. But this one will be this assessment, and if you want to put a title on it like Sample Library, you can do it that way. In here, what we're going to do is now just open up your test. Well, that's my test session, and these are all the files. I'm going to highlight these, and I'm going to hold down Option and drag them up in, or I can hit Command C and copy them, and then come up to this folder and paste them in. Now, with this, I've got a nice selection of files. Realistically, what's probably going to be the easiest way of someone working with this session and playing around with it. Where are those files gone? Ah, I didn't even put them in the folder. There we go. That's better. So now if we're in this folder, I'm probably not going to want to open a whole separate folder just for kick close and a separate folder for snare close if I'm looking for them. But what I would probably want is close mics and distant mics. And then I can actually coordinate these into the relevant folder. So if I'm looking for that snare close, I can then look for the distant one and find the relevant ones. If you were dealing with a session, like some of you are, that are post-production related, if you're wanting to categorize them into, I know some people are doing houses and doing like lounge room samples or kitchen samples. I don't probably need a whole folder that is knives and then have 3 audio files in there. But if you categorized all the kitchen ones so that I can go to one spot and find all of them and they're labeled clearly when I open it up so I can see it's knives or cups or saucers or the fridge or whatever the sample is that you've created, that's fine. This labeling gives me enough information, but do use folders when it starts to get a little bit too hectic or there's big categories that you want to separate. Once you've got that, grab your whole folder and compress it so that you have a zipped version of it and submit that. I do not want a submission of your Pro Tools session. You will be marked down if you give me a Pro Tools session or any other DAW. I only want the final sample library that contains the perfectly labeled WAV files that follow all of this expectation. The other thing that should be included inside of this zip folder is your text document that gives me an explanation of how you actually did this recording process, along with the reflection and your photos. The photos can be in a separate folder, or they can just be embedded into the document. If you just want to submit it as a PDF or a Word doc, that's totally fine. But use this as your key guideline of what you should be doing for submission. Essentially, if you follow the instructions in this little tutorial that I've been through, make sure that your files meet those criteria, that they sound clean, that they're edited cleanly, that they're average levels. That's really all we can ask for. And if there's additional processing that you need to do, like potentially some denoising or different processing, have a conversation. Shoot me an email, let me know, or just do some basic looking at things like Linda tutorials. But if there's anything you can't find an answer for, do get in contact if it falls outside the realm of the basic processing we talked about in here. That's pretty much it. And any other questions we'll be able to answer for you in week 13 session, where we will be essentially giving final feedback, and I can kind of in person help you with this process a little bit further. Cool. Have a great Easter.